The following program is produced by Marshfield Community Television.
I have been on board since June of 2014. I was the field coordinator and ecological consultant for the land trust portion of it. And then when they merged, they asked me, would you like to head up our education? And I said yes. Because that's basically my background. And so since June of 2014, that's what I've been doing. Sino Conservancy was private for a long time. And nobody knows what we do. Even people on the street have never been here. They have no clue as to what we do. So, what do we do? You're probably wondering as I go on and on. Well, this is a little picture of, would you mind turning off those lights, please? That would, I think it'll be better if we turn it. Is that okay with you? Yes. Okay. So we have 131 acres here. And we do lots of different things. Obviously, we do a lot of land management, we do land preservation, and we do natural resources education, otherwise known as environmental education. And because we have so many lovely habitats, and you cannot find a bad vista to take a picture from it. I mean, every place you turn is prettier than the other place. So we have a tamarack wetland that I am absolutely focused on finding somehow to manage out the glossy buckthorn because it's so beautiful. And a Eagle Scout years ago built a boardwalk out into it for us. So you can walk right out there and pet the tamaracks, and we have triangle sedge and we have leatherleaf and ferns, and it's pretty amazing. The oak tree in your upper left-hand corner, right now she is in competition with other trees in Racine County to be honored with a Trees That We Love award that Hoy Audubon is putting on. And so they came out last week and measured her and took pictures of her, and so hopefully keep a good thought for her because so many people have been married under that tree, they have birthday parties under that tree, or they just sit for a while and look up into her gigantic canopy. In the upper right-hand corner, that is just in front of that big tree. That's our pavilion, and it's located in Memorial Field. We do rent the facility out for all manner of events, not only things like this, but weddings and anniversary parties and graduations and Eagle Scout things. And you should see what this place looks like when it's all decorated for a wedding. It's pretty spectacular. And then, of course, we have some managed prairies, and if it stops raining and it's not lightning, we'll be able to go out and see what those look like, and I can give you a little bit more history of those. The problem is that we've had this horrible spate of really, really hot weather, and there's been no rain, and a lot of the blooming plants just decided to give it up for the year. They were done, they'll try again next year, but there's still some things blooming out there. Our mission is dedicated to sustainable forestry, natural resources education, conservation, and land preservation. Ron Rasmussen, who is the president of our board of directors, will be coming later on to talk to you about the horrible, awful emerald ash borer and how it's affected us and what we've done about it. So I won't steal his thunder. So I love this picture. This is one of the little kids who's been coming here since she was about 2 years old, and she's chasing milkweed seeds. This was a couple of years ago, but it's a really great place for kids to spend a lot of time, and grown-ups as well. All right, so my presentation is called The Purpose-Driven Landscape. You gotta understand, I'm a total plant geek. I love native plants. I love them professionally, I love them personally. I just love everything about them. And so we're gonna talk about native plants, and this is the Woodland Plant Edition because we're all about woodlands and forests here today. So that's what we're going to focus on. Technically, my presentation is only supposed to be a half an hour, but I think I've already exceeded that, so I'll go as fast as I can. I always either start and or end with something from the great Aldo Leopold. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Aldo Leopold. Wow, I thought the whole group would know that. See, that's really interesting to me. Okay. In my opinion, everybody in Wisconsin should learn about Aldo Leopold. He was one of the greatest land managers, and in fact is considered the father of land management. Great conservationist, great Renaissance man, and one of the greatest writers ever to come along in a long time. But one of the things he said was, conservation is the harmony between man and land. When the land does well for the owner, and the owner does well for the land, then both end up better by reason of their partnership. And we have conservation when one or the other grows poor, we do not. That is native landscaping in a nutshell, because native landscaping is about relationship. It's about partnership between you and the plants and the land and all of the other things that depend on those plants. Native landscaping is nothing like conventional landscaping or horticultural landscaping. And I'm going to show you why. And that pretty illustration is actually a woodland edge plant. So Turk's cap lily, they've bloomed already. They like rich soil, a little bit moist, and sort of dappled light on the edge of the forest. It's absolutely stunning. It's just a beautiful plant. Okay, what does it mean if you're a native plant? Who would like to tell me? Nobody. Nobody wants to tell me. All right. So if you're a native plant, it means you are indigenous to an area. You are endemic. You occur there naturally. You were not put there by a human being or some other force having been transplanted from far away. You are a plant that evolved part and parcel along with that soil cycle, that water cycle, and that particular climate, and all of the other things within that habitat. Other plants, insects, birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, microbes, okay? Fortunately, in Wisconsin, we have thousands of species of native plants who are well suited to grow wherever you live. So if you live north of that tension line or north of the tension zone, as you get up to where all of our conifers are native, you have more acidic soil, and sometimes you have better drained soil. So there are plants that love the woodlands and the wetlands and the prairies there. When you go down below that, as you get out here, maybe into the driftless zone, we've got sandier soil, but we have very sandy pockets out here too. But we also have nice, beautiful, heavy clay soil. But there are hundreds of native plants that either don't care about it or they love clay soil. So when you're doing native landscaping, you look at your habitat, what do you have, and then you pick the plant species that are supposed to go with that. When you do non-native landscaping or conventional landscaping, you pick this one plant and then you change the environment to make it grow. So it's a very different approach. There are literally hundreds of plants, native plants, that you should have growing in your woodlands. What you shouldn't have growing is vinca and pachysandra and, good grief, putting hostas around trees. Oh my goodness, we have so many shade-loving plants that we can do that. And then, of course, the terrible triad: garlic mustard, buckthorn, honeysuckle, the scourge of pretty much every place. Fortunately, they can be dealt with, though. Okay, so when you embark upon native landscaping, it's all about collaboration. It's not about competition. It's about community. So you're entering into a community of plants that interacts with a community of insects, a community of birds, a community of mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and all of the microbes and the fungi that live in the soil. And you become part of that community. You live within that community. You're not the center of it, but you are part of it. Native landscaping is about conservation of resources. Now, you know, we've had a real dry spate here, and all of the non-native plants just basically keeled over. Some of the native plants bloomed and were done pretty early, but their leaves are doing really well. That's because they have really amazing root systems that go way down underneath the ground, sometimes 14 feet underneath the ground. So they are water conservative, they're soil conservative. And they also conserve other native species, because other native species depend on these native plants in order to survive, and those native plants depend upon them for their survival. Our native plants couldn't survive if we didn't have native pollinators. And you're going to see a little bit about that in a minute. So, purpose and function. All native plants have a purpose. All of them have a function. You may not know what it is, but I can assure you that they all have a purpose and a function. Raise your hand if you know what this plant is. Oh, a few people. Okay, good. So this is such a great plant. It truly is a spring ephemeral. So it comes up and flowers. That's that flower that looks sort of like red leather with spots on it. It comes up when there's still snow in the ground. Late February, early March, the ground is still pretty frozen. And it has this extravagant display of this strange looking flower. So it has a spathe, which is like a hood, and it has a spadix inside, sort of like a fruiting body. And that fruiting body produces pollen, produces a lot of nectar. And it grows in low, wet woodlands. Why would a plant spend so much of its energy when there's still snow on the ground, and the ground is basically frozen, to bloom like crazy? Why would it do that? It's late February, early March. Why would this plant do that? What else is happening during that time? Things are getting a little warmer, and when you go outside, you might see a few early emerging insects flying about. But all insects require a certain temperature in order to be able to fly. And interestingly enough, skunk cabbage is one of 3 plant species that can produce its own heat. So inside that spathe, it can be 30 degrees warmer than the ambient air temperature. So if it's 32 degrees outside, which is sometimes pretty warm for February and March in Wisconsin, it can be 62 degrees or more inside that hood. So that fly or that flying insect can dart in there, get a little bit of nectar, get warmed up so that its body fluids are doing what they're supposed to do, and then fly out again. But why? 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 Why does this insect need to be flying about at this strangely early time? What else is happening?
They're also propagating and laying their eggs.
No.
They're not doing any pollinating yet.
No, well, they might be doing a little pollinating. Who else is coming back this early in the season? Birds. So birds, regardless of what species, when they are returning, they use up an enormous amount of their energy stores, and they need protein. So these insects are protein. So the insects are going in there to survive during this early, cold spring period, and then when the birds come back, they have a protein source in order to replenish all the muscle tissue they've lost, and then they can go on and find a mate, and they can do their thing. So it's about community. It's about relationship. And all plants within the native plant community possess that. Native pollinators have to have native plants, and native plants have to have native pollinators. And it's interesting because all you hear about are honeybees, but honeybees aren't native. Honeybees are an introduced species, and honeybees generally don't nectar on native plants because they don't have the right mouth parts. But we have hundreds of different kinds of native pollinators that do. And so the data shows very clearly that our native pollinators are more efficient and effective at pollinating than honeybees are. The trouble is that our native pollinators, by and large, aren't colonial, and we can't control them. We make man-made structures for honeybees to live in, so every kind of hive that you can think of, and we can control their behaviors, the coming and the going. We can harvest their honey and all that sort of thing. So native pollinators are as, or probably most likely more important than even honeybees are at this point in time in terms of pollination. Okay, there's that tree I showed you, our beautiful tree, and it was all set up for a wedding. A lot of people don't have big properties, and they can't They don't have a whole woodland to put in a woodland landscape, and that's okay. If you can only do one thing, then plant an oak tree, because our native oak species support over 500 distinct species of native butterflies and moths without any detriment to those trees whatsoever. So can you imagine how many moths and butterflies have depended on our huge oak over the decades and decades and decades? It's just amazing to me. Okay, so we're going to start at the ground level, because people always say, I have this really shady area and nothing grows in there. I can't get grass to grow in there. And you know why? Because grass isn't supposed to grow in the shade. That's why. So isn't that fortunate for us? So let's start with some really little plants. People always disregard moss, which is really unfortunate, because Wisconsin is home to literally hundreds of species of moss that are native. And particularly up north, where you have more acidic soils and different microhabitats under those conifer trees, it can support a whole host of native moss species that we can't down here. I always cringe when I see people trying to eradicate moss from their landscapes, because I mean, mosses are so fascinating, and they've been used for millennia for lots of different things. So I would highly encourage you, if you have a woodland landscape and you have any moss there, if you can find someone to help you identify it. If you can't, then learn how to support its growth. They're very important plants, and they're just so fascinating, because some of them just simply sit on the surface of the soil, barely have any root structures at all, or they grow on a rock, or they grow on a piece of dead wood, and yet they can manage in seemingly hostile conditions to create the most beautiful landscapes and hold on to the soil to prevent soil erosion. So if you have moss, I highly encourage you to love it. Now, or at least learn to love it. I put up a distribution map there, because we're talking about native species. So, for example, this moss, which is common club moss, you can see is native mostly north of the tension zone. If I were to go up there and dig up a bunch of club moss and bring it down here to Kenosha, technically that moss is non-native here. It doesn't mean it's an invasive species. It's just not native to this region. Probably it won't survive, because we don't really have the right soil conditions for it. Some people are generalists in terms of native species. If it's native to Wisconsin, just plant it anywhere in Wisconsin. And some people are a little bit more particular, like me. And let me give you an example. We have a number of beautiful native orchid species, and they're very specific in terms of their habitats. And I get phone calls about people who've dug up big swaths of lady slipper orchids and brought them down here, and they don't survive. And that's one of the reasons those orchids are threatened and endangered. They don't live here. They're not supposed to live here. They have a niche where they're supposed to survive. So there is a cautionary tale about transplanting plants outside of their ecotone or their region. Now, you go all over the state and you'll see white pines. White pines aren't native down here, but they grow well down here. They tolerate a wide range of conditions, but technically white pines are native up north. But they are beautiful, and they're popular, and boy, you just can't, you can't get anything better than wind whistling through the white pine. So, sometimes you have to be a little flexible. Have you ever seen this plant?
Sure.
So this plant, if you're patient enough, but you have to be patient, it's very slow spreading, but it doesn't get any higher than your ankle. Dark leaf, very fuzzy, and you can see that it has that funny little flower. Remembering that it's all about community and relationship. There's a tiny little beetle, really tiny little black beetle, that's primarily responsible for pollinating this plant. And those little flowers lay down on the ground underneath the leaves so that the beetle can get inside the flower and pollinate it. If it didn't do that, that little beetle would have a terrible time managing to pollinate this flower, this plant, and the plant would have a terrible time surviving. It does like, oh, thank you, you're a very kind person. It does like wetter areas, moister areas, but if you mulch well with really good composted mulch, even if it's sort of a dry woodland that you live in, it'll do fine. So that's wild ginger. There are so many violet species that are native to Wisconsin. You can form a beautiful carpet of violets, large, big, beautiful swaths of violets. They come in a variety of colors. And then, depending upon the species, you either have those big heart-shaped leaves or you have finer leaves like the birdfoot violet leaf. But those are an excellent solution for places where turf grass won't grow. We have something called Virginia creeper, and it can be a terrific ground cover. It's a vine, actually. It's called Parthenocissus. It'll go up, it'll go over, it'll go around, and it'll also make a very dense ground cover that native plants will grow up through, but it helps to choke out things that you don't want. It can turn beautiful, beautiful colors in the fall. All different colors of red and claret and orange and sort of a darkish purple, and it gets beautiful berries on it. It's a really great vine or ground cover, depending upon how you like it to grow. The undersung heroes of the native plant world, native landscaping world, are all of the sedges. There's a sedge species for every single habitat in Wisconsin, whether it's wet or dry or open or closed, rocky. I mean, they are incredible. They come in all different sizes, and they all have these really interesting seed heads. One of the best ones for a woodland habitat, if you want a carpet of something, if you want a swath of something, is Pennsylvania sedge or Penn sedge. It really never gets more than 12 inches tall, and usually it's about half that size. And the leaves or the fronds are so delicate and so beautiful, and as it gets taller, they kind of drape over. They get those beautiful little flowering seed capsules on the top, and you think it's grass, but it isn't grass. It's a sedge. Grasses and sedges are completely different, and as I said, there's a sedge species for every place. Sometimes sedges can get this tall. Wetland sedges are really amazing. There's prairie sedges, there's path sedges. It's just pretty amazing, actually. Sedge gardens are really beautiful. If you ever get a chance to see a sedge garden, it's well worth it. And by the way, all of these plants are readily available from native plant propagating nurseries. Wisconsin is very lucky because we really led the nation in terms of getting native landscaping going, and also then businesses learning how to propagate native plants and then selling them. Especially up north, there are a number of really good places, and the closer you get to up north, the closer you are to Prairie Moon Nursery in Minnesota, and they're excellent as well. Okay, so then people say, well, I want flowers, I don't want just green stuff. Well, there's a lot of flowers. Keep in mind, though, that the flowering, low-growing plants, herbaceous plants in a woodland, they come up in springtime before the leaves are out, and they grow and they bloom, and then as soon as that canopy starts to unfurl, they go back down. That's what they're supposed to do. It's called a spring ephemeral. Many of them will have beautiful leaves that persist pretty much all year long, but their flowers won't necessarily persist. Now, violets seem to hang on for a while, but there's one you saw it actually in that first picture I showed you with the club moss. It likes more acidic soil, like many mosses do. It's called bunchberry. It's actually a dogwood, but it's more herbaceous than it is woody, like red osier dogwood or gray dogwood or yellow dogwood. Really beautiful little plant, beautiful leaves, nice little flower, low growing, looks awesome in your woodland landscape. You've all seen bloodroot, I'm sure, right? Raise your hand if you know what bloodroot is. Common throughout Wisconsin, gorgeous plant, and those leaves will persist for quite some time. And when it's growing in the right habitat, those leaves get huge, absolutely huge. And what's really cool about these plants that are a little bit taller than the ground ones, with the leaves that persist, it keeps that woodland soil shaded and cool and moist, which supports other living things in the soil. And it's also very water conservative. Hepatica, we have sharp-lobed hepatica primarily, and also round-lobed hepatica. The interesting thing about this one is these beautiful little white flowers will come up first, and then they sort of fade to this beautiful pinkish lavender color, and then the leaves come up. If you have the right conditions, you will have absolute waves of hepatica in your woodland. And then there will be a wave of bloodroot, and then there will be toothwort. And it's just, you never want to leave when you go in the woods in the spring. It's just amazing. We do have other colors of flowers in the woodlands other than pink and white. One of my favorite ones is Uvularia grandiflora. That's called marybells. About a foot or so tall, and it's supposed to droop over like that. It's not that it doesn't have enough water, but this beautiful bell-like yellow flower, really pretty. That's one of our native woodland plants that can tolerate dense shade. Most woodland plants need dappled shade, the leaves, the sun coming through the moving leaves of the forest. But Uvularia can tolerate some dense shade, and it's such a nice color point in a shady landscape. Really pretty. Some people want grasses in their woodland landscape. There are grasses that grow in lower light conditions. They tend to grow on the woodland edges, though, not in dense shade. One of the prettiest ones, or one of my favorite ones, is bottlebrush grass. Bottlebrush grass can be an indicator of very high quality native landscaping. Then we have the wild rye. So a downy wild rye or a silky wild rye that can grow on the woodland edge and a little bit into the woods. And it really does feel like silk when you touch the leaves. It's very, very soft. There's another one called cinna or common wood reed. That's a really pretty grass, kind of tall, delicate, likes a little bit wetter conditions. So if you have someplace in your woodland that's a little bit moister, maybe like a little bit of a swale in there, that one will look really nice. These are not turf or clump forming grasses. Turf grasses, they grow in clumps. And particularly with the Elymus, it tends to be a very open clump of grasses. So you're not going to see a dense planting of it. Yeah, there are so many more plants that you can put in your woodlands. We have all kinds of vines. I'm not talking about grapevines. There's a beautiful little low-growing vine called hog peanut that looks like poison ivy, but it's not. That can help you stabilize soil. Vines are often good to help stabilize soil. There's something called carrion vine. I don't know if you've seen carrion vine. Really beautiful dark green leaf, kind of seersuckerish. Gets a beautiful bunch of very dark purple berries on the bottom of it. We have woodland sunflowers. There are so many sunflowers that grow in lower light conditions, woodland edge conditions. And right now they're still blooming. And of course the goldenrods, we have grassleaf goldenrod and blue stem goldenrod and zigzag goldenrod and elm leaf goldenrod. So there are so many things that you can put in your woodland landscape, whether it's just your home landscape or if you do have a bigger tract of woodland species. If you have any questions, if you want to find out where plants can be sourced, just give me a call. There's a really wonderful fellow by the name of Professor Doug Tallamy, and his website is fantastic. It's called Bringing Nature Home, and you can find out what insects depend on oak trees or maple trees or whatever it is. It's all about relationship in this book. It's really great. Of course, here in Wisconsin, we have our university herbarium system, which has taken a big hit of late, and they've had to combine, and some of it has been lost, but we still have quite a bit that we can resource on the net. I don't know if any of you have heard of Wild Ones. Wild Ones is an excellent, excellent resource for people. And another good website that I really like is the Fish and Wildlife Service or Forestry Service website. They have amazing information about native plants, but you have to have time to sit there and read it because it's pretty long. I wanted to show you very quickly, you don't have to write these titles down, but if you're interested in any of these books, take a picture of it with your phone. There's so much information on prairie plants, not as much information on woodland plants, but you can find it. And all of these books are easily found either through the Wild Ones website or on Amazon or at your local nature center bookstores, at your local library. So when you get a chance, come on up and take a look at these. Thanks for asking great questions. I appreciate it.